The beer industry built Berlin, especially the district of Prenzlauer Berg. In the 19th century, with industrialization, came a great growth of population, and with that came jobs working in the brewing industry. Then came fantastic new architecture, great technological developments, and frankly, to find out all about it and how it's centered on what is now the Kulturbrauerei, I need to talk to Berlin booze expert Dan Cole. Dan, lovely to see you. Thank you for coming to tell us all about beer history.
I appreciate the invite, and I love talking about beer, so it's great to be here.
You don't just love hanging out with me? No, look, I've been a tour guide for a long time, and for a short period I was a guide up in Hamburg. One of the places I would like to show people is the Hopfenmarkt. It's where hops were bought and sold. This is about 200-300 years ago. People would buy their hops there and they would go and make their beer at home, a job that was quite often done by women, and one of the reasons for that wasn't just so that the whole family could enjoy a nice beer together, but it was to create a beverage that was safer than the drinking water.
Mostly.
Mostly nonsense?
No, it's mostly factual. You're on the right track for sure. But we have to, when we're talking about beer, I always say we have to start from the beginning. Beer is made of 4 ingredients: water, malt, hops, and yeast. And the last 2 are very interesting because hops wasn't really added until 1,000 or so years ago. And then yeast wasn't actually discovered until the previous century. They just thought it was a thing that happened.
Oh, by previous century, do you mean the 1800s?
Yes.
We're old, aren't we, eh?
Exactly, yeah. It is said that the Germans or those in this region added hops to create an additional flavour to it, because beer, water and malt is a bit kind of ooh.
It's a bit goopy.
Bit goopy. So hops adds this kind of bitterness to it, as well as helps preserve it, which is very important later on to our story. So yes, in regards to what you said, drinking beer is safer than water because they didn't have sanitation.
When you say was
because there was a lack of sanitation for a long period of time. So drinking from the river and the streams was quite unpleasant. So brewing malt, adding hops to it, was a much safer way to drink. And everyone was doing it, from kids, adults, whatsoever. And it wasn't done on an industrial scale, it was done at home. So yes.
Yeah, something everybody did.
Yes, and this is where how women came into it. They were the major brewers of the day.
Right, which is obviously quite the opposite to how it is today.
Yeah.
And so when do we start then drinking beer rather for pleasure?
It was drunk for pleasure to such an extent that there were problems with the cultivation of barley, malt, so much so that back in the 14th century they had to introduce the Reinheitsgebot, this law that said you can only make beer out of these 3 ingredients. Yeast wasn't included because they didn't know
it existed. I'm going to do a sneaky tour guide correction. 1515, the Reinheitsgebot. That's one of the, I remember the 500th anniversary, that's why. And I might have said I'm old, but I'm not 200.
Okay, I should know better. But yes, beer was drunk so much that they had to say, okay, you can only use this type of malt, to prevent other people using the other types of malt, which should be used for making bread and other such food commodities, to be put into beer. But yes, beer was pleasurable as well as a necessity, so much so that it was produced on a mass scale. So what does that mean? There was varying different types, varying different qualities. But for the most part, beer was an ale, which was very dark or quite dark, quite sickly and a little bit warm. And the quality varied from wherever you are, from whoever made it, and even from the time of year, because it required different brewing, which was very much affected by the weather.
By the temperature.
Exactly,
and storage. And so your neighbour's brewing this, you're brewing that, everything's kind of very different. I think we should say it was also quite different up here, as it were, in northern Germany as it is now?
Well, Berliners like to do things differently. Whilst the majority of what is today Germany was drinking this malty soup, the Berliners were drinking Berliner Weisse. The origins of which, it's a little bit up in the air. People say that it came from the French Protestant immigrants, the Huguenots.
Yes, who were basically invited to build up the population after the disaster of the 30 Years' War, which ends in 1648. So we have a lot of French arriving, and they bring this funky beer brewing with them.
Yeah, exactly. So around northern France or modern-day Belgium, they were drinking sour beers. You use a different type of yeast. And Berliner Weisse, for those who don't know, it's a low-alcohol ale, which is very sour. And it often uses different types of fermentation process. And so in the 1800s in Berlin, this was the main type of beer that was drunk. There were over 100 different manufacturers of Berliner Weisse, and it really kind of stood out.
Yeah, it especially stands out today because it comes in a glass with a stem, with a kind of bowl, and it will be either luminous green with Woodruff or Waldmeister flavouring in, or luminous red with raspberry flavouring in. And is this to sweeten the sour taste?
Actually, the proper way, I would say, of drinking Berliner Weisse is pure. So without adding these artificial sweeteners to it. It's a sour beer. But to get children into the world of beer drinking, they would add these sweeteners to it. Yeah.
So something that we would consider rather dangerous and immoral today. You know? Everything changes for beer with the Industrial Revolution then.
Yeah.
So now things are going to start to be mass-produced beginning of the 19th century. And there's a kind of earthquake moment for beer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I call it the Lager Revolution.
He loves a revolution.
I love a revolution. But there was actually a revolt that spurned this. In the Czech town of Pilsen, back then, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Czech people in the town, they were tired of drinking this warm, horrible malty goo. And they took all the barrels, they took everything that was being made in the city, and they went to the town square all together, and supposedly they poured all this beer down the drain, and they went to the mayor and they said, "We're tired of drinking bad beer, like, can you change this for us?" At the same time, what was happening around Bavaria, they were experimenting with new yeasts, bottom-fermenting yeasts, which create beer at a cooler temperature. They could do that in this area because they could brew in the mountains, and the area also had access to caves. So when you use bottom-fermented beers, you have to lager them, store them at a cooler temperature in order for them to ferment.
So this is where we get the name
Lager, yeah.
Just German for a place where you store things.
Exactly. So the townspeople of Pilsen, they went to one of these German brewers and they said, "Please, can you come and save us from this life of poor beer that we have to endure?" And he came over and he created new brewing techniques and established what would become the brewery Pilsner Urquell, which still exists today.
One of the most popular beers in the world.
One of the most popular beers. And he essentially created a new type of beer, Pilsner, which is the most drunk beer throughout the entirety of the world.
What Johnny Lehman calls normal beer.
Normal beer.
There we go.
Exactly.
And so how do we go from Berliner Weisse, this kind of sour beverage, to normal beer up here in Berlin?
So Pilsner is a far much more enjoyable beer in terms of how it's accessible to everyone. It has a softer palate, it's a little bit sweet, it's a little bit, it has that little bit of malty flavour, and it's chilled. And one particular man saw a great opportunity for this. He was a Bavarian entrepreneur called Joseph Pfeffer, and he saw that in Berlin at the time, no one was making lagers. So at the start of the 1840s, he moved to Berlin and wanted to start his own lager brewery. He looked inside the city because at the time, the city was enclosed within these tax walls.
Much, much, much smaller than it was today.
Exactly.
And if you connect up all the different tours you find in Berlin, Frankfurter Tor, Rosenthaler Tor, Rosenthaler Platz as it is now, Cottbusser Tor, you can basically connect where that old wall would have been when Mr. Pfeffer arrived wanting to make his beer.
Yeah, and this was during the Industrial Revolution. So everyone was kind of pining for space, as it were, how to start their business. So he didn't really find anything, but then he looked outside the walls, modern-day Prenzlauer Berg.
Berg meaning?
Hill, yeah. And he saw an opportunity there because not only was there a lot of space, but it was on a hill, which meant that he could dig down to create caves that you could lager your beer in. Also had a great access to clean groundwater. So
it was the perfect place for beer to really start to influence this city.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a hill. It's a giant hill by Berlin standards, and there's a bit more stuff beneath the earth here because Berlin is all very swampy. This would be important back when the Berlin Wall was up as a place where really it was practically the only place where you could tunnel beneath the Berlin Wall. So the vast majority of tunnels were in this district, which would be great in the 1960s and 70s, but back in, say, the 1860s and 70s, it meant, right, once we've made our product, we can safely store it to sell it later on.
Yeah.
You know? So there is still the Pfefferberg, where the beer was brewed. Is it still brewed there today?
There is a craft beer brewery there, but it's not the original one. What was interesting about building something on Prenzlauer Berg back then is that it was known as Windmill Hill.
Yeah, Windmühlenberg.
Which was full of windmills, farmland, and even vineyards. And so on what is today Schönhauser Allee, there was an old coaching house, a place where people would stop and rest or eat and drink when they were horsing and carting between different villages in the area.
Technical term.
Yeah. And so he acquired this place and set up the first lager Pilsner brewery in Berlin.
And so why isn't it still a giant business today?
It existed for many, many decades, and in fact it ran up until the next century. Even if you go and visit there today, if you scale up and out the back, you can still see relics from this industrial period. There are still chimneys and the beer caves still exist, but the rest you have to use your imagination of there being this big beer garden with lots of tables and chairs that went out onto the streets. It succumbed to the fate that many breweries that started off in Berlin in the time, in that it was acquired by a much larger brewery conglomerate, Schultheiss.
Okay, you're the big guy on the logo. It's one of the big Berlin breweries. When did Mr. Schultheiss start his business?
Interesting story. He was not the founder of the business, and he wasn't even the guy that developed the business. So where Kulturbrauerei is today, this was the location of the original Schultheiss brewery. And mid-1800s, this was a simple bar and beer cellar that was owned by a businessman called August Prell, who had another brewery in the center of town. He also had the problem of how to expand, how to grow my business with these tax walls in the way. And he ended up selling this space to another entrepreneur called Jobst Schultheiss, and he is the guy that you see on all the bottles, on all the bars.
I mean, he looks like a giant. And this dude in my head, he's like 8 foot tall, and he's always like a pint looks small in his hand. You know what I mean? But you said he didn't grow the business, so
yeah.
he's just the face of it. What happened to Mr. Schultheiss?
He ended up selling the business to Adolf Rosiker, another business entrepreneur man from the area, who passed the business Schultheiss down to his son, Richard Rosiker, who was very young at the time. He had just come out of fashion college.
The classic fashion college beer brewing conglomerate.
Exactly. But he was very well known for his drive, his innovativeness, and other factors that were integral for the growth of this business.
So what happened? How did it develop?
Well, there were two important factors behind Rosiker's character. One, he was a technical innovator. He was one of the first brewers to introduce electrical refrigeration systems into the brewing and making process. Before this, people had to use ice. They had to go down to Müggelsee with picks and horses and carts and literally take the ice, rush it into the city and put it in their cellars.
Store it there and hope that by September your beer is still cold.
Exactly, yeah.
Fascinating. And so we've got these technological changes that are coming. I think perhaps the biggest and most obvious is the one that's behind us, which is, this is a former water tower, now it's fancy apartments, that's life. Because surely if you're brewing all this beer, you're going to need a lot of water.
I mean, there's two factors. Berlin has a good access to water from under the ground, which was used in the beer making process. But as the business expanded, they eventually would go on to employ 2,800 people, set up other businesses. There needed to be malting houses where they essentially cooked the grain so that it could be used. They had to set up brick making factories as well, also established here in Prenzlauer Berg to help build the buildings that would go on to be what you find in the culture brewery.
Which at the time was one of the largest breweries, certainly in the country, if not the world.
Exactly. And so because of this, the area of Prenzlauer Berg grew massively. Housing, building, and so you needed clean water. And this was one of the first water towers that was built in the area to pump up water to carry through into
the workers'
houses.
homes.
Yeah.
And when you walk around here today, I mean, it stands out because it's one of the few parts of town that wasn't completely destroyed. You have a lot of these pretty older buildings, and when I bring people here, they're so nice, and they'd be nice to live in too, but probably not when they were built. When they were built, sure, they looked pretty, but they were crowded, they were unhygienic. Life was a lot tougher 150 years ago than it is today. And I have to say, in my head, so were working conditions. How was it to work up at the big, beautiful Kulturbrauerei as it is today?
Well, like I said, there were two important characteristics of Rosica. One was his nuance for looking at where technology was going and embracing future technologies. But the second one was his progressiveness, especially when it came to employee rights. So you have to imagine the early days of Schultheiss Brewery. He then wanted to expand it, and he did this with the help of one of Germany's most famous architects, Franz Heinrich Schwechten.
A friend of the Kaiser's.
Exactly, yeah. He built the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church,
which would later become the defining symbol of West Berlin. What was a magnificent church ends up damaged and preserved afterwards.
So he helped bring this kind of romantic-esque architectural style to the brewery. He built the chapel style tower that you see at the beginning.
Where the present-day Franz Club is.
Exactly, yeah. So that the brewery was known as the Church of Beer. And a lot of the buildings that exist there today were built during this period. And that included like a cooperage for the people who made the wooden barrels, the places where you stored the horses. But on top of that, there were also things like a workers' restaurant and canteen, a creche for people to leave their kids.
Lager their children.
Exactly. And all of these were very new for the time because, as I said, Rosica was big into employee rights. There were company days out. He set up funds for legal rights. He set up protection in case people got injured, additional funds for widows in case their subsequent partners died during the manufacturing of the world's greatest beverage. Not only that, but he pushed for the abolition of children to work in factories.
Okay, that's a big step.
Yeah. And for people to have Sundays off as well.
Okay, so the workers were totally happy?
Yes, jein, as they say here. So you have to remember this was peak Industrial Revolution and workers' conditions were not great. But towards the end of the 1800s, a lot of people were coming together in kind of socialist groups.
Yes, despite Otto von Bismarck trying to bring in the anti-socialist law and stop this from happening, they become the largest party in the country. At a time when the parliament building, the Reichstag, is new and it doesn't really have much teeth, they can only basically yes or no laws. I should say when they did build the Reichstag, 1895 off the top of my head, one of the statues that adorns it is a beer brewer. I found that out like a couple of days before this and I was like, oh, Dan's going to love that, He's up there holding this like little paddle and so. And so I guess the workers They're agitating for a bit more.
Exactly. So 1894, there was the Great Berlin Beer Boycott. Wanting more rights, more workers' rights, the Coopers, again, the barrel makers, of which there were 300 at Schultheiss, they went on strike.
Which means you can't store the beer.
You can't do anything. And as such, a lot of people in Berlin resonated with this, and a lot of bars and restaurants stopped buying from Schultheiss. So much so that it forced Ruzicka's hand to push and give greater working conditions for his employees, to bring the the day-hour rate down to 9 hours a day, far out, and push for more holiday days and days off and workers' protection.
So more things that are getting closer to the kind of working standards that we would expect to have in Germany today.
Ruzicka was always on this path. It was always part of his identity and what he wanted to achieve. He ended up being a representative for the Liberal Party in the Reichstag and publishing several papers on employee rights, which were used by industrialists throughout the city. So to say he was one of the most important people for Berlin, for workers' rights, is an understatement. Ruzicka had a big say in lobbying for additional resources being allocated to Prenzlauer Berg. So he helped bring what was today the ring barn, the railway lines closer to the brewery to help ship the beer off around the world, but also introduced like fire stations in the area, water towers. All of these things were here because of him. Ruzicka died 1903 of ill health, but the business began to further prosper up until the Great War.
Had a big influence on changing the city and the country, you could argue, socially. But this giant beer industry also, I mean, it changes this area physically as well. You've got, several horses that are going to move things around. That can only get you so far. I mean, when we look at big innovations of the 19th century, it's trains that come to Berlin, and what would become the ring barn is actually some of the oldest train network in the city. And the trains have to come to the brewery as well, right?
And especially the case for Schultheiss, the scale of which is very difficult to fathom when you look at the area and you look at the building nowadays. It was 25,000 square meters. There were 2,800 employees at its peak. It was producing 1.8 million hectolitres of beer a year, which is more than modern day Schultheiss even produces. And on top of that, there were around 300 horses alone required to pull things along.
Just to ferry the stuff about?
And transport beer throughout the city, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, crazy that it's more beer that was produced then than it is now. But actually, I have to say, there were more people living here at that time as well, as it was also so much more crowded. The population of Prenzlauer Berg is still, just off the top of my head, about 100,000 people fewer than it was, back when Schultheiss was really in its pomp. Yeah. What happens to Schultheiss when we look at the First World War and all this terribleness that came afterwards? Germany's cut off from supply lines. It's tough to get hold of materials. Presumably they just stopped making beer.
No, but a lot of the other breweries did. So at the end of the century, there were over 120 different breweries in Berlin, which is kind of hard to fathom. It was known as a powerhouse in the world for its beer manufacturing. Most of those died, stopped functioning the Great War because lack of supplies, war efforts, etc.
Lack of demand, people are poor.
Yeah, but Schultheiss kept running.
Fantastic. And then surely would have entered a heyday in the 1920s, a time of boozing and drugs and excitement and fun, basically.
Yeah, and Schultheiss, again, great business acumen, not only with the use of technology and workers' rights, but it acquired a lot of other different breweries, not only in Berlin, but outside. In the 20s, it became the biggest beer business in the world.
Oh, wow. The biggest in the world.
Yeah.
After the 20s and this fun period comes the least fun period. Obviously, when the Nazis come into power, they'll actually use an area next to this water tower here as a temporary concentration camp for a short period. The Nazis, whilst they are opposed in many ways to things that they consider immoral, beer is not off the menu. I mean, the party got started with Hitler, giving speeches in beer cellars in Munich, right? And so I can only think, I'm probably going to be wrong again, that they stopped making beer this time because of the bigger, darker war, right? World War II.
You'd think so, but whereas other commodity businesses were put on hold or liquidated for the war efforts, beer was seen as an essential commodity during the Second World War. So Schultheiss kept running during this period, albeit they manufactured beer with a smaller alcohol content, smaller wort value, but it still carried on.
So yeah, they can't quite get their hands on the best ingredients at this time is of no surprise. But if they're making beer still in this great big industrial center in Berlin, I mean, for me that has to mean during World War II, especially after 42 and so, that surely they were touched in some way by slave labor.
Yeah, like all industries were during this period. And Schultheiss predominantly employed Ukrainian and Italian prisoners of war to carry on the manufacturing of beer, yeah.
I know by the time we get to the end of World War II, by the time the Soviets are invading Berlin, there are literally hundreds of thousands of these foreign forced laborers in the city. And actually, in kind of preparing to chat to you today, I found out that what is now the Kulturbrauerei, the former Schultheiss brewery, that was actually the headquarters for that particular sector of Berlin, Sector H. So we have A through H looping around the city and then Sector Z in the center. What I did find strange was that the brewery was possibly the very last, or certainly one of the very last places to surrender to the Red Army, to the point where they surrendered after the Berlin garrison had already surrendered. But in finding this out, I also was able to find out that brewing continued not long after the war ended. From the very same place, brewing continued in October of 1945. And so that tells me that they must have continued brewing there in East Germany.
Yeah. Under the DDR, in East Berlin, beer manufacturing was very controlled. Schultheiss was kept on under the supervision of the DDR and the same location up until 1967, when the last beer was brewed there.
You still see the big Schultheiss fella around. You can still walk into bars and grab a Schultheiss today. But you told me perhaps quite a few of the beers that I'm drinking turn out to be Schultheiss, is that right?
Exactly. When you go to a Späti, a lot of the beers that you see there, Kindle, Berliner, they are all made by Schultheiss. And so we kind of arrive at the modern day period. You compare it back to the previous century or the century before, when 120 breweries, and now we have somewhere in the region of 40 to 50. Many of them are craft beer breweries that brew different styles from around the world. Kind of epitomizes Berlin's international place, where you have Americans or people from Latin America coming here and creating kind of West Coast, New England, IPAs, different types of sours. But it's become a very cosmopolitan place for beer manufacturing.
I have a little trick for finding the modern day breweries of Berlin. What I do when I'm at home is, and I'm working at my office, I spin around and I pick up this book, which is written by Dan Cole. Interesting.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah, Beer Hiking Berlin, the tastiest way to discover Berlin. And so Dan, you are an author of several books about hiking and exploring. This one is focused on Berlin and beer breweries, but there's also vineyards across Germany and Europe as well. You're working on stuff. So yes, Dan is an excellent person to follow if you want to see where you could do various hikes and walks and things. And I should tell you, you know this already, but they don't. You're one of the accounts that inspired me to start making stuff. So yeah, do check out whatever Dan is putting out. I want to tell you a fun fact that the symbol of Prenzlauer Berg in the 1990s, the coat of arms for this district, actually did include a windmill, grapes, and hops. It is sadly no longer still in use, but hey, it was a little nod to the history for a while.
It's appropriate, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
What is even more appropriate is you and I going off to have a Berliner Weisse.
I think it's about time.
All right.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Nice, very nice.